So welcome to how to automate everything with CDK in AWS. And a bit about me. I've been working with AWS since 2014. Started doing CloudFormation templates, and I've done my fair share of YAML and CloudFormation. So I know that I don't want to keep doing it. But at the moment, I'm working as a cloud architect within Sigma Technology Cloud. And I'm working with CDK with TV4 at the moment. And when I'm not, during my spare time, I tend to be out in the woods somewhere, with a tent and a way to big bike. But let's go through the agenda. So today we will talk about CDK, the concepts, why we want to use it, and we will see how we can build a simple API with it, and go through how we can automate things like deployments, pipelines, and testing, and just make our developer experience a lot nicer. So let's go through where people are at when it comes to automation and so on. Now, there are still people doing ClickOps, right? Sitting in the console, creating things manually. And this isn't good, because you have no automation whatsoever. Setting up multiple environments become a pain. But there are some people that write their own deployment application. Now, you might have a big Node.js application or a big Python application that create a bunch of stuff like load balancer, Lambda functions, etc. And this becomes very tailor-made to your application, and you will have this blob of code that no one wants to touch. But many people are using stuff like CloudFormation, Terraform, and this is not really code, right? This is where we do a parameterized template that we apply to several environments to create our Lambda functions, our auto-scaling groups, and so on. This is when you get stuck in JSON land or in YAML land, and you will have a person on your team often that becomes an expert on it, and then that person gets to do all of the boring stuff, and that person has often become me. And it works. You have it in Git. You have good tooling for it. But then you have tools like SAM and serverless. And these ones help you even more, right? Because now, rather than just setting up your API gateway, all of the permissions, all of the roles, you have a tool that helps you. But it doesn't help you that much when you have to work with tests. You want to do other things besides Lambdas. Then what you really want is something like CDK. And according to AWS, CDK is just an open source software development framework to define your cloud infrastructure as code. And you can use TypeScript, you can use Java, C#, and soon even Go. But for these examples, we will use TypeScript. And why do you want to use CDK then? Well, because it's actually code, right? Now people say that, well, we use Terraform because we want infrastructure as code. No, you don't. You have infrastructure as templates. It's not really code. And templates are messy, right? If you have one big template that is supposed to be your production environment, it's your staging environment, and it's your dev environment, you often run into things that those environments might differ, right? You don't want 20 machines in your development environment. You might have different backup rules and so on. And then you have this parameterized template with a lot of conditions that becomes hard to test. Because you will test a template by deploying it, right? And how often do you manually deploy a production environment? Not that often. So you might miss something in those intrinsic functions that you have, and then the production deployment becomes, well, not really prod anymore. So let's go through how we actually work with CDK. Well, we will start with just doing a CDK init. And this just creates a CDK app. And in that app, we will create the stacks that we want to have. And these stacks can be our application stack, it can be our database stack. It's the same concept as just a template. You create your stack as them. But then you create instances of those stacks for each of your environments. And in these stacks, you will then have your Lambda functions, you will have your buckets, you will have your pipelines, etc. And then, when you're happy, you will type CDK sint. And these actually create one stack per environment. And this is a bit of a paradigm shift. Because before, you had this one big template that you used in all different places. Now you will have one template for dev, one template for production. If you are doing multiple regions, you might have one template for your US East region and one template for your Asian region. And you have good tooling here. You can write a CDK diff that shows you exactly what's about to happen. And then, of course, at the end, CDK deploy, and your code is up. And when we are writing a CDK app, we use something that is called constructs. And a construct is a bucket, it's a function, it's something that you deploy. And to start off with, you have these low-level constructs, which is just a one-to-one mapping to CloudFormation. And thankfully, we quite rarely have to use these ones. Because if we use these ones, and you want to create a service, for instance, in ECS, you have to create a role, you have to set up task definitions, and everything becomes a bit tedious. But if you use the higher level constructs, then you're working with something that is more familiar to SAM, right? Or to serverless framework, where you get everything for free. You just point it to your code. And then we have the pattern constructs. And these are the highly opinionated constructs that basically gives you a whole application. You have a Docker image that you just want to put up. Well, take the load balance Fargate service. You just point it to your Docker image. It built it. You can give it a DNS name. It will set up a Route 53 record. It will provision certificates. It will do everything. So it becomes very easy to do things very quickly. So let's have a look at a quick example. Now this is an empty stack. You can see that we have a construct that is the scope. This is typically the app. Or if you are building your own construct, that might be the stack. But let's add a Lambda function to it. Now we are just pointing to the code where the Lambda function is, right? But if you want to deploy this, you know that you might need more. You have to put your code somewhere. You have to put it on an S3 bucket, perhaps. But I don't really want to think about that, and I don't have to. I just write CDK deploy, and CDK will fire up Docker, and it will actually build my Lambda function, package it. It will look at the dependencies, package it down to just one small index.js file, and upload it to S3. And then in my template, I will have something that looks like this. Now this means that I don't have to care about how I get my code up in the cloud. I just have to care about my code. And let's continue this example. Let's say that I have a DynamoDB table, right? And I want to access this table. Now, how many of you have gotten a PR that you get the policy that you have to review that looks something like this, right? Someone has written a bunch of policies, and you look at them and you think that, yeah, I think that's exactly the policy that we want to have. Are you sure? Well, sometimes I am, sometimes not. Sometimes you might have conditional keys that you need to set. Sometimes you, as with S3, you have to care, is it a bucket or is it a key? But with CDK, I don't have to know the policies. I just write the following piece of code, table.grantReadData. And that's a nice thing about this. I can get the least privileged policy, apply to my functions, without knowing all of the IAM policies below. And I can trust that PR, that, yeah, you have applied a least privileged policy to your function. And what's also great about this, code completion, right? If I'm wondering what I can do with something, I just type table.grant, and I can see the different types of permissions that I can apply. It really, well, the downside is that you will forget how IAM policies works. But there's another thing in our process when we work that can also be a bit tricky. That's enforcing standards. Now, let's say that we are a big company, and we have a security team that is a bit understaffed, right? That always happens. The security team says, well, use the cloud, but for heaven's sake, encrypt everything, right? Then someone creates a bucket like this that we intend to use, right? Now, this bucket is just a pure bucket. It doesn't have any encryption on it whatsoever. And we might miss that and we might miss that. And we shouldn't be able to miss it. So what we can do is that we can write an aspect that will inspect everything within our app to make sure it's compliant with whatever standards that we have. Or we can modify things to fit our need. So in this case, we will look through the entire app, see that we have a bucket. We will check that it has the bucket encryption. We don't really care what type of encryption, just that it exists. And if it doesn't, fail. So we know that, or at least I, as a developer, know that in this PR, I don't have to care about my colleague following all of the standards, because we are enforcing them. And what's also really nice with CDK is that, well, or what's nice with code, is that code is testable, right? So, sorry, this is how you apply it. Forget about that one. But code is testable. And that means that we can write unit tests to our infrastructure. Now, if you're using CloudFormation or Terraform or these template solutions, you might have something that defines, is this a production environment? In this case, do that. Or you might have a parameter that you want to enable backups. But how do you test that? Well, you deploy it and you verify that the resource has backup, right? Well, here I just do a unit test to check that if I set this property, I will get that property. I will get backup. This removes the need for deploying all the time for just simple conditional tests, right? Because the templates won't really have any intrinsic functions or if statements in them, because you generate your template exactly as you want to have it. What's also really powerful are snapshot tests. Now, a snapshot test in Node simply checks that whatever this operation did looks exactly the same as before. And this is really powerful, because now I have a test that will fail all the time. And I can modify my template, and I can see that the test fails, and I can determine, right, is this difference actually expected? Does it fail the way I want? Do I get the additional resources that I wanted to? Or am I doing a cleanup, just refactoring code? I don't want any changes, but I get changes anyway. So this gives you really rapid feedback. So let's move on and see how we actually can implement things with CDK and do a live demo on how CDK actually operates and how it works. And that screen is still working, perfect. So what I have here is, let's make this one a bit smaller for now. What I have here is an initial pipeline application that will deploy a pipeline, and it will deploy an empty stack, right? And we will add a small API in it. And the pipeline itself is a CDK construct, and the entire pipeline will be CDK. We won't have to write any code pipeline specific stuff with steps and jungle templates left and forth. We won't write any YAML. This will be a YAML and JSON-free presentation. And within CDK, we have these pattern constructs. And this code pipeline is actually one of them. What we are doing here is simply just doing a pipeline that will update itself. And we can take a look at that pipeline quickly. So let's go into code pipeline. And we should have, it's this one here. And it's simply the pipeline. It takes the code. It will do a synth. And then it will update the actual pipeline. So, and I have this, and everything is set up, right? So I just do git push, I will change my pipeline, and everything will work. But what I also have here, let's find the pointer, it's there. But what I also have is I'm setting up a small API stack here. And this is the stack that we will actually test against. So what we can do quickly is just deploying that stack now. That stack is completely empty, we don't have anything. But let's just take and deploy it. And we can actually take CDK watch, and we can watch for changes and have CDK just automatically update our environment. No, what did I forget here? Oh, sorry, it's not AWS CDK, it's CDK deploy. And we're triggering deploy. So let's add the API that we want. And let's start with adding a quick, easy Lambda function. We take it as a hello world handler, and we will put this behind an API gateway. And let's get some code for that one. And this is just a simple handler. It just says hello. And let's make sure that one is saved. And then within the API stack, we'll create our function. Now I just have to keep looking at the right screen. Node.js function. So it needs a scope, and it needs a name. And this is the logical name that we are giving it. And then some properties. And what we have to do, we just have to point it at the function. So .ts, all right? Then we want to add this behind an API gateway. Now, no. Sorry? Thank you. Then we want an API gateway behind this one, right? Now we can create a REST API, and we can add a default proxy integration, and we can add permissions, or we can just write Lambda REST API. And we take this, and then API gateway. And then we specify our handler. Oh, right, and then we need to take a reference to this one. And then we can just do like that. All right. And then deploy. And CDK will now just automatically deploy this. Now, what is really nice with CDK, that is a bit hard if you work with normal cloud formation, is that quite often you want to test your code within AWS, right? And you keep on deploying your templates, which might take a bit of time. And you want to inspect your functions while they are actually running. And here, CDK can help us. Because keep in mind, when we did a CDK deploy, we added the watch attributes. And when we have the watch attributes, not only will it look at our files locally, but it will also keep an eye on our AWS environment. So let's just give this a bit of a second, because you might be because we will change our code way often than we change our infrastructure. But I'm a bit too lazy to go back and forward CloudWatch logs, to go back to the Lambda function, and so forth. So I want a quick and easy way just to modify my code, and I want a quick and easy way to inspect what is actually happening. And now we have a link here to our function. We can just open this one. And with that, I might be breaking my promise from a JSON-free presentation, but at least it's not that much. We get the hello here, right? But let's say I want to do some debugging, things are crashing, so let's add a console log event, and let's also do change output, so we see that we're actually doing something. And then save it. Now, what you will see here in the logs is that we can see the last invocation. So CDK actually gives us the invocation directly here. And when we are building now, we will see that we didn't have to do a full deploy. We just did a hot swap of the function. So the function is now live for us to actually test. And we get hello and then the empty path. And within our shell here, any moment, we get the logs from CloudWatch as well. So this really enables you to work quickly. And this doesn't only work with Lambdas. You can use this very same approach when you're working with Docker. So you could have an ECS service, work with the Docker image, change your Java code, and then CDK will just build the Docker image, and it will do a hot swap on the actual image. So you don't really have to go through the whole CloudFormation steps here. But yeah, now we have a quick and easy API. And we want to have this within the pipeline. So let me just find it. And here we have the pipeline. Now, we don't have to deploy the pipeline ourselves, but we can rather rely on the pipeline deploying itself. But we need to add an API here. And to do that, we need to add a stage for it. So let's create a stage here for it. Do a class, API, stage. It extends the stage. Constructor is a construct, and then we want to have the ID, which is a string. Right, and this is the stage here, and this is just a cloud. This is just a CDK construct, and here we can say what we want to do in our deployment stage. And what do we want to do to deploy? Well, we want to create a new stack. So let's just do new API stack. And this is a stack that contains our API. Let's do API stack. And then we skip the props. And then later, down in the stage, we can simply do pipeline.addStage, new API stage. And we do this. And then we do deployment stage. And we don't have to do anything in this one, but now we can just do a git and git push org main. No, oh, right, I have to commit this. new shiny API and git push. And it's in my code commit repository. So let's go back to code pipeline. And we can take a look at the pipeline that we have. And we see now we are updating the pipeline. Now what will happen is that this pipeline now will transform to have multiple steps here for the assets that we create, because keep in mind that the Lambda function is in an asset that has to be built. And we will get steps for deploying the pipeline or deploying the API. And I have a finished, I have an example that has executed here. Let's take a look on this one and see how a big pipeline might actually look. And the same thing here. We have our code. The pipeline will do a synth. Then the pipeline will update itself and then add whatever stages it needs. It will upload the lambdas to S3 and then deploy. And in this one, I have added a few more things, because you can actually take CloudFormation outputs in CDK. We use them in it. Add steps that isn't really CDK, but rather is a shell step. So within the pipeline, I can add migration steps. I can add test steps. So this actually contains two steps. We have a dev step that deploys the dev environment. Test it, and if it works, we go on and we add the prod API. So this is an example on how to both build an API and how to build a pipeline. And let's see if it is remembered where I am. So yeah, so what we have shown here is a bit how to use CDK as an alternative to using your template, right? You have code. You don't really have to care about using JSON or YAML. You don't have to troubleshoot intrinsic functions. You don't have to write a template that you have for multiple environments. Just write an if statement, and if that if statement is false, well, you won't create the resource you want to have. So it's a lot easier. And handling applications with CDK is also easier, because CDK takes care of your Docker files. It takes care of your Lambda functions. And you have really good tooling. And handling pipelines with CDK becomes really easy, because you don't have to know everything about code pipeline. You just write code. And after all, code is what we know, right? So yeah, so thank you. And if you have any questions, please, feel free.